The entire dining hall fell silent. Not because someone shouted, not because glass shattered, but because someone said no. Eleanor Whitmore had already decided the waiter's fate. She always did. One mistake, one glare, one snapped command, and another life was rearranged to suit her mood. No one moved. No one spoke. Then a voice came from the back of the room. Soft. Steady. Unafraid. That won't happen. 200 guests turned toward the sound. It came from the maid. Not a manager. Not security. Not the billionaire himself. A maid. Grant Blackwood paused mid-step outside the hall, his hand still on his phone. He didn't know why he stopped walking, but something in that voice forced him to listen. Eleanor laughed. She always laughed before destroying someone. "Who do you think you are?" The maid stepped forward anyway, and in that moment, everything Eleanor built on fear began to crack. But what no one knew, not even Grant, was that this small act of defiance would uncover secrets buried across cities like Chicago, New York, and San Francisco. Secrets Eleanor never thought would follow her, because sometimes power doesn't fall when it's challenged by someone stronger. It falls when it's challenged by someone who isn't afraid to lose anything. And to understand how a maid brought a billionaire's fiancé to her knees, we have to go back to the beginning. Everyone at Blackwood Estate in Aspen, Colorado, knew one rule: never cross Eleanor Whitmore. She wasn't married to billionaire tech investor Grant Blackwood yet, but she already ruled the estate like a queen who feared no consequences. Staff whispered her name like a warning. Careers ended with a snap of her fingers. Complaints were buried. Apologies were demanded, never accepted. Grant rarely saw it. When he was around, Eleanor transformed. Warm smile, gentle laugh, charitable elegance. To the outside world, she was America's next billionaire bride. Then Lila Monroe arrived. The morning Eleanor Whitmore fired Maria, she wore Valentino and drank champagne from a crystal flute. Maria had worked at Blackwood Estate for 11 years. She knew which rooms Grant preferred for morning coffee, how he took his eggs, the exact temperature he liked the pool maintained. She had references from Denver's most prestigious households. She sent money home to her mother in El Paso every month without fail. None of that mattered. Eleanor found a water spot on a wine glass. One glass, one spot. "Pack your things," Eleanor said, not looking up from her phone. "Security will escort you out in 20 minutes. Maria's hands shook. "Miss Whitmore, please. I have 3 children." "Then you should have been more careful." Eleanor took another sip of champagne. 18 minutes now. The head housekeeper, Patricia, tried to intervene. She'd been with the Blackwood family for 23 years, long before Grant met Eleanor at a tech conference in San Francisco. She'd earned the right to speak. "Miss Whitmore, perhaps we could—" Eleanor's eyes snapped up. Cold. Precise. "Perhaps you'd like to join her." Patricia went silent. Maria left crying. Her daughter's college fund 3 paychecks short of the semester payment. That was Eleanor's style. Swift, absolute, designed to send a message. The staff learned quickly. Don't make eye contact. Don't offer opinions. Don't breathe wrong. Eleanor had gotten a server fired for clearing plates from the wrong side. She'd had a gardener escorted off the property for trimming hedges in the wrong pattern. She once made a chef redo an entire dinner party menu for 40 guests because she decided she didn't like the color of the garnish. The estate sprawled across 12 acres of aspen mountainside, all glass and stone and mountain views that belonged in architecture magazines. It had 18 bedrooms, a wine cellar that held bottles worth more than most people's homes, and a staff of 32 people who worked in carefully orchestrated silence. They all had the same advice for newcomers. Survive until Eleanor gets bored. Don't engage. Don't defend yourself. Definitely don't challenge her. But here's what made Eleanor truly dangerous. She was brilliant at hiding it. When Grant was home, she transformed. The warmth in her voice sounded genuine. Her laugh filled rooms like music. She remembered names, asked about families, donated to staff charity drives. She'd pose for photos at local fundraisers, write checks to children's hospitals, and give interviews about the importance of giving back. Grant saw that version, the version who brought him coffee in the morning and listened to his concerns about board meetings, the version who supported his tech investments and attended charity galas in gowns that made photographers fight for the best angle. He didn't see the version who made a pregnant housekeeper scrub floors on her hands and knees as punishment for being slow. He didn't hear the version who called a junior chef stupid 17 times during a single dinner service. He never witnessed the version who threatened to call immigration on a dishwasher's family, even though they were all legal citizens, just to watch him panic. The staff knew better than to tell him. 3 people had tried in the first 6 months of Eleanor's presence. All 3 were fired within a week, their references mysteriously impossible to verify afterward. Eleanor's background check had been impeccable. Graduate of Columbia, marketing executive for a prestigious firm in Manhattan, charity board member. Her father was a federal judge. Her mother came from old money in Connecticut. She spoke 3 languages and had connections in every major city from Boston to Los Angeles. What the background check didn't show was the trail of assistants who'd quit her previous jobs citing hostile work environment. The NDAs signed by former staff. The sealed HR complaints from New York and Chicago. Grant had fallen for her at that San Francisco conference 3 years ago. She'd given a presentation on brand transformation that had the room riveted. Afterward, they'd talked for 3 hours about technology's role in social change. She was brilliant, passionate, and unlike anyone he'd met in Silicon Valley's echo chamber. He proposed 14 months later at sunset in Santorini. The ring cost more than most houses. The wedding was scheduled for June at the estate. 200 guests, tent overlooking the mountains, orchestra flown in from Vienna. But first, Eleanor wanted everything perfect. The staff, the grounds, the reputation. She wanted Blackwood Estate to reflect her standards. So she ruled with an iron fist wrapped in Hermes. The morning Lila Monroe arrived, Eleanor was in the middle of berating the head groundskeeper for allowing a single fallen leaf to remain on the driveway. The man had worked for the Blackwoods for 16 years. He was nearly in tears. Eleanor didn't notice, the new maid watching from the service entrance, but the other staff did, and they tried to warn her. Lila Monroe wasn't supposed to be at Blackwood Estate. The agency had called her at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, desperate. Their regular placement had quit without notice. Something about unbearable conditions, and they needed someone immediately. Night shift, cleaning and service, 3-month contract, possibly longer. The pay was twice what she made at her current job at a hotel in Denver. Lila said yes before hearing the rest of the details. She arrived Wednesday afternoon with 1 suitcase and a photograph of her younger brother Marcus tucked in her wallet. Marcus was 17, brilliant, and currently studying at a prep school in Ohio that Lila could barely afford. Every paycheck was divided the same way: rent, food, Marcus's tuition. Anything left over went to his expenses. Their parents were gone, Mom to cancer when Lila was 19, Dad to grief and alcohol 2 years later. Lila had been 22, working at a diner in Cincinnati when she became Marcus's legal guardian. She'd promised their mother she'd make sure Marcus had the opportunities they never did. So far, she'd kept that promise. Marcus had a 4.2 GPA. College scouts were already calling. He wanted to study engineering at MIT. Lila would clean 1,000 estates to make that happen. The staff housing at Blackwood was nicer than her apartment in Denver. Private room, attached bathroom, mountain views. She unpacked quickly, then reported to Patricia for orientation. Patricia was kind but exhausted. She took Lila through the estate's layout with the efficiency of someone who'd given the tour 100 times. The main house has 3 wings, Patricia explained, walking briskly down marble corridors. Family quarters on the west, guest suites on the east, common areas in the center. You'll work nights, so you'll rarely see Mr. Blackwood. He's usually in New York or San Francisco during the week. And Ms. Whitmore? Lila asked. Patricia's expression flickered, just for a second. Ms. Whitmore keeps her own schedule. They passed a junior maid named Sophia in the hallway. Sophia saw Patricia with the new hire and made a small gesture, a warning shake of the head. Patricia pretended not to notice. During the lunch break, 3 staff members cornered Lila in the break room. Sophia spoke first. Listen, this isn't hazing. We're trying to help you. Miguel, one of the senior waiters, nodded grimly. There are rules here, unofficial ones. Don't speak unless spoken to, Sophia continued. Don't make suggestions. Don't try to fix anything, even if you see a problem. And whatever you do, don't get noticed by Eleanor. Ms. Whitmore, Miguel corrected automatically, then shook his head. We all call her Eleanor behind closed doors. Safer that way. Lila listened quietly, her dark eyes moving between them. She got rid of 5 people last month alone, Sophia said. One guy forgot to refill the hand soap in the powder room. Another accidentally made eye contact during a party. Someone else had the audacity to say "bless you" when Eleanor sneezed. What happened to them? Lila asked. Fired. No references. Blacklisted at every agency in Colorado. Miguel lowered his voice. Eleanor has connections everywhere. She'll destroy your career if she decides she doesn't like your face. So keep your head down, Sophia concluded. Do your job. Stay invisible. That's how you survive here. Lila absorbed this information without expression. And Mr. Blackwood? He's fine. Decent, actually. Generous with bonuses. Respectful. Miguel shrugged. He just doesn't see what happens when he's not around. Has anyone tried telling him? The silence that followed was answer enough. Sophia finally spoke. People have tried. They don't work here anymore. That night, Lila started her first shift at 8 p.m. She moved through the estate's public rooms with quiet efficiency, dusting, polishing, checking that everything met the exacting standards Patricia had outlined. The work itself wasn't difficult. She'd been cleaning since she was 16, working her way through community college and every job since. What struck her wasn't the luxury, though it was staggering, the kind of wealth that felt almost obscene when she thought about Marcus's tuition struggles, but the atmosphere. Even empty, the rooms felt tense, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Around midnight, she encountered another night worker, an older man named James, who maintained the indoor plants. "You're the new girl," he said, carefully trimming a fiddle-leaf fig. "How long do you think you'll last?" "As long as I need to," Lila replied. James smiled sadly. "That's what they all say." He paused, then added, "Advice from someone who's been here 18 months. Eleanor breaks people for sport. Don't give her a reason to notice you exist." Lila thought about Marcus's latest email, excited about making the robotics team, about the scholarship application due next month, about the promise she'd made to their mother. "I'll be careful," she said. But she didn't say she'd be invisible. Because Lila Monroe had spent her entire life watching powerful people treat workers like furniture. She'd cleaned hotel rooms while executives threw tantrums over thread counts. She'd served tables while wealthy patrons snapped fingers and made impossible demands. She'd stood in rooms where people like her were expected to accept humiliation as part of the job description. She'd never challenged it before. She couldn't afford to. But something about this place felt different. Something about the fear in people's eyes, the way they moved through corridors like ghosts, the absolute power one person wielded over dozens of lives. 3 days later, Lila would step forward in that dining hall. 3 days later, everything would change. But that night, she just finished her shift, returned to her room, and called Marcus to hear about his day. She didn't mention where she was working, didn't mention Eleanor, didn't mention the warnings. She just listened to her brother talk about engineering and robots and the future he was building, a future she'd sacrifice anything to protect. Grant Blackwood made his first billion at 32 by investing in a startup that revolutionized cloud storage. His second billion came from an AI company that predicted market trends with unsettling accuracy. By 38, he'd backed 17 successful tech ventures and earned a reputation as the investor with the golden touch. Money had never been the goal. Grant grew up comfortable. His father was a successful attorney. His mother taught literature at University of Colorado, but not wealthy. He'd learned to code in his parents' basement, attended CU Boulder on academic scholarships, and started his first company with $20,000 borrowed from his grandmother. What drove Grant wasn't wealth accumulation. It was the work itself. The thrill of spotting potential others missed. The satisfaction of helping build something that mattered. He funded companies developing clean water technology, affordable education software, medical devices for underserved communities. He genuinely believed technology could make the world better. Eleanor seemed to share that vision. She'd built her marketing career on campaigns that emphasized social responsibility. Her firm had helped launch non-profit initiatives across 3 continents. She spoke eloquently about using privilege to create change. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of shared values and intellectual connection. Eleanor understood his world in ways few people could. She didn't need his money. Her family had plenty. She wanted partnership, collaboration, someone who saw the world as she did. Or so Grant believed. The warning signs were subtle at first. A comment here and there about staff being lazy or incompetent. Insistence on replacing the long-time estate manager with someone more professional. Small changes to household operations that Eleanor framed as efficiency improvements. Grant had been too busy to pay much attention. His latest investment was a renewable energy startup struggling with regulatory challenges. He was spending 4 days a week in San Francisco, flying to DC twice a month for congressional meetings, and managing a portfolio that required constant attention. Eleanor said she understood. She'd take care of the estate, the wedding planning, the day-to-day operations. He could focus on his work. That's what partners did. The few times staff issues surfaced, Eleanor had explanations ready. Maria made too many mistakes. I gave her 3 warnings. Delivered with concern, not malice. The chef was stealing from the pantry. I had to let him go. Said with regret, as if it pained her. Patricia is wonderful, but she's getting older. Maybe it's time she considered retirement. Framed as compassion, not cruelty. Grant believed her because he wanted to, because she was brilliant and beautiful and made him laugh, because she listened when he talked about his investments and offered insights that were genuinely helpful, because she fit into his world so seamlessly, hosting dinner parties that impressed his business partners and supporting his philanthropic work with enthusiasm, and because acknowledging the truth would mean confronting something uncomfortable about his own judgment. His business partner, Marcus Rowan, had tried to warn him once. They'd been having drinks in Manhattan, and Marcus had mentioned hearing troubling things from someone who'd worked with Eleanor in New York. Just stories, Marcus had said carefully. Might be nothing. But maybe do some digging. Grant had bristled. Eleanor's brilliant. Some people can't handle strong women in leadership. Marcus had dropped it. But his expression said everything. Grant's sister, Rebecca, had been more direct. She'd visited the estate for a weekend and witnessed Eleanor speaking to a server with barely concealed contempt. Afterward, Rebecca pulled Grant aside. There's something off about her, the way she treats people when she thinks no one important is watching. You barely know her, Grant had replied, defensive. She's under a lot of stress with the wedding planning. I know power when I see it being abused, Rebecca said quietly. Rebecca worked as a public defender in Los Angeles. She'd built her career on spotting predators. Just be careful. But Grant hadn't been careful. He'd been blind. Not because he was stupid or cruel, but because accepting reality would mean admitting he'd been wrong about the person he was planning to spend his life with. It would mean acknowledging that he'd brought someone into his home who was systematically terrorizing people who depended on his estate for their livelihood. It would mean taking responsibility for the power he'd handed Eleanor. So he looked away. He told himself the staff turnover was normal. He convinced himself that Eleanor's high standards were actually admirable. He rationalized every uncomfortable moment as misunderstanding or stress or the price of maintaining a world-class estate. He buried himself in work, board meetings, investment calls, speaking engagements. He let Eleanor handle the house, the staff, the details of daily life, and every time he walked through the estate's corridors, he didn't notice the way people flinched, the silence that fell when Eleanor entered a room, the fear hiding behind professional smiles. Grant Blackwood had built an empire on spotting patterns, predicting human behavior, seeing what others missed. But he missed what was happening in his own home. Until the night everything changed. The night he was walking past the dining hall, phone in hand, mind on a conference call scheduled for Tokyo. The night he almost kept walking. But something made him stop. A voice. Soft but unshakable. The kind of voice that shouldn't exist in a room where Eleanor Whitmore had already decided someone's fate. Grant paused outside the dining hall doors, one hand on the polished brass handle. And for the first time in 3 years, he decided to look. The dinner had been planned for 6 weeks, a private charity fundraiser for Colorado education initiatives. 50 of Aspen's most influential residents filled Blackwood Estate's grand dining hall, the kind of people whose casual conversations moved millions and shaped policy. Eleanor had orchestrated every detail. Italian marble tables, baccarat crystal, centerpieces flown in from a florist in Manhattan. The menu featured sustainable ingredients from local farms. The wine list included bottles worth $5,000 each, and the chamber quartet playing Vivaldi in the corner had performed at Carnegie Hall last month. She wore a red dress that photographed like liquid fire. Valentino, custom-made, the kind of gown that ended up in fashion magazines under headlines like Aspen's New Power Couple. Her hair fell in glossy waves, diamonds glittered at her throat, and her smile could have charmed senators. It did charm senators. 3 of them were at table 4, listening to her discuss education reform with the passionate eloquence of someone who genuinely cared. This was Eleanor's gift. This was what Grant saw. This version could work a room like a conductor leading an orchestra, making everyone feel heard, important, valued. She remembered names, asked about grandchildren, praised achievements. People left her events feeling inspired. The irony was sharp enough to cut. In the kitchen, 30 feet away, the staff moved in choreographed silence. Patricia supervised service with military precision. Servers carried courses with practiced grace. Everything had to be perfect. One mistake, and someone's career ended. The waiter's name was David Richardson. He was 42, married with 2 children, and had been working at the estate for 8 months. He'd survived this long by being invisible, by executing every task flawlessly, by never giving Eleanor a reason to notice him. Tonight, he was handling Table 7, a Colorado governor, a tech CEO, and 2 foundation directors. Everything went smoothly through the first 3 courses: Caesar salad with house-made croutons, butternut squash soup with truffle oil, pan-seared Chilean sea bass with microgreens. Then Eleanor decided to check the seating cards. She did this sometimes. Random inspections, sudden decisions that the arrangement wasn't optimal, that someone important should be sitting somewhere else. The staff knew to dread these moments. Eleanor approached Table 7 mid-conversation, her smile bright. "Governor, I'm so sorry, but I think there's been a seating confusion. Would you mind terribly if we moved you to Table 3? Senator Morrison was just asking about your infrastructure initiative." The governor was gracious. Of course. Eleanor snapped her fingers at David without looking at him. "Fix this. Now." The room was full, every seat occupied. Moving the governor meant shuffling 4 other people, which meant resetting place settings, moving wine glasses, transferring partially eaten courses. It was a logistical nightmare designed to look effortless. David moved quickly, professionally. He coordinated with 2 other servers, managing the transition with minimal disruption. Within 3 minutes, everyone was resettled. But Eleanor had already noticed a problem. While moving the governor's wine glass, a single drop had landed on the white tablecloth, barely visible, the size of a pinhead. She waited until David returned to the kitchen to address it. "Stop!" Her voice cut through the chamber music. David froze halfway across the dining hall, carrying empty plates. 50 pairs of eyes turned toward him. Eleanor approached with that smile still in place. "Bring those back here." He did, confused. "Ms. Whitmore." She gestured to Table 3. "Look at what you've done." David looked, saw the wine drop. "I'll get a fresh cloth immediately." "You'll get your things and leave." Still smiling, still pleasant, as if firing someone in front of Colorado's elite was perfectly reasonable dinner entertainment. The governor shifted uncomfortably. A few guests exchanged glances. David's face went pale. "Ms. Whitmore, please. It was an accident during the reseat. I don't employ people who make accidents." Eleanor turned to Patricia, who had materialized beside the kitchen entrance. "Call security." "Ms. Whitmore," David's voice cracked. "My wife is in surgery right now. She had an emergency appendectomy this morning. I'm supposed to pick her up at midnight. Please, I'll fix it. That sounds like a personal problem." Eleanor's tone remained pleasant and absolute. "You should have called in sick." "I tried. I was told we were short-staffed. I came in because you wanted to keep your job. And now you're losing it anyway." She gestured to Patricia. "Security, now." The room had gone dead silent. Even the quartet stopped playing, uncertain whether to continue. David's hands shook as he set down the plates. His eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Please, my wife. She needs me to—" "Then you should have been more careful." That's when the voice came from the back of the room. Soft, steady, unafraid. "That won't happen." 200 eyes, guests, staff, Eleanor, turned toward the service entrance. Lila Monroe stood in her blue maid's uniform, white apron crisp against the fabric. She wasn't tall, wasn't imposing, wasn't anything that should matter in a room full of Colorado's most powerful people. But something in her stance, in the calm certainty of her expression, commanded attention. Eleanor's smile widened. She always smiled before destroying someone. "I'm sorry," she said with exaggerated courtesy. "Did someone ask for your input?" "No," Lila replied. She walked forward, not fast, not slow, just steady. "But I'm giving it anyway. The governor leaned toward the person beside him and whispered. A senator pulled out her phone. Patricia gripped the doorframe, her knuckles white. Outside the dining hall, Grant Blackwood paused mid-step, phone forgotten in his hand. And Lila Monroe kept walking toward the woman everyone feared. Eleanor Whitmore had been challenged exactly 3 times in her life. The first was in college, by a roommate who'd accused her of sabotaging a relationship. Eleanor had that girl removed from campus housing within a week and spent the next semester systematically destroying her social life. The second was in New York, by a junior executive who'd questioned her numbers during a presentation. That woman never worked in marketing again. The third was by Grant's business partner Marcus, who'd once suggested Eleanor's behavior at a company dinner was inappropriate. Marcus still worked with Grant, but Eleanor made sure their interactions were minimal and uncomfortable. No one challenged Eleanor and survived intact. She'd built her entire adult life on that principle. So when Lila Monroe walked across that dining hall floor, every person who knew Eleanor understood what was coming. Total destruction, immediate and thorough. This maid would be gone within the hour, blacklisted within the day, and would spend the next year struggling to find work anywhere. That's how it always went. Except Lila didn't look afraid. She stopped 5 feet from Eleanor, close enough to speak without shouting, far enough to maintain dignity. Her uniform was spotless, her posture straight. She looked Eleanor directly in the eyes, something staff had been explicitly trained never to do. "David's wife is in the hospital," Lila said, her voice carrying in the silent room. "He came to work when you were short-staffed, despite a family emergency, because he's reliable and professional. He handled a difficult reseating you requested without complaint. A single drop of wine during that chaos isn't a firing offense. It's a reason to say thank you." For 3 full seconds, Eleanor just stared. Then she laughed. That light, musical laugh that always preceded someone's destruction. "You've been here 3 days. 3. And you think you understand how this household operates?" "I understand how basic human decency operates," Lila replied. A guest at table 5 gasped audibly. Patricia had gone completely white. David stood frozen, tears streaming down his face silently. Eleanor's smile never wavered, but something shifted in her eyes, something cold and calculating. "What's your name?" "Lila Monroe." "Well, Lila Monroe, you just volunteered to join David on his way out." "Patricia, No." Lila didn't raise her voice, didn't move, just held her ground. That single word hung in the air like a bomb. No one said no to Eleanor Whitmore. No one. Eleanor's expression finally cracked. Just for a moment, pure rage flashing across her features before the smile returned. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" "I said no. You're not firing David, and you're not firing me." Lila's voice remained steady. "Not tonight. Not for this. Do you have any idea who I am?" Eleanor stepped closer, her designer heels clicking on marble. "Do you understand the connections I have? 1 phone call and you'll never work in Colorado again. I can make sure your name is toxic from Denver to—" "My brother is 17 years old," Lila interrupted quietly. "He's studying at Riverside Prep in Ohio on partial scholarship. I work 3 jobs to cover the rest. I clean hotel rooms at dawn, I work retail on weekends, and now I work here at night. I send him every dollar I can spare because our parents are dead, and I promised I'd get him through school." The room had gone so silent that Lila's words fell like stones in water. "I know exactly what you can do to me," Lila continued. "I know you can make my life harder. I know you can call your friends and blacklist me at every agency in the state. I know you have that power." She took a breath, and something fierce flickered in her eyes. But what you can't do is make me watch you humiliate a good man in front of all these people while his wife recovers from surgery and pretend that's acceptable because you're rich and I'm not. That's not power. That's cruelty, and I won't be part of it. Fire me if you want. I'll find another job. I always do. But I'm not walking away from this. Eleanor's face had gone from pleasant to marble hard. You're nothing. A maid. A nobody. You could do a lot of things, Lila agreed. But right now, all these people are watching. She gestured subtly at the room full of senators, CEOs, philanthropists. They're watching you threaten to destroy 2 staff members because of a wine drop the size of a freckle. They're watching you ignore a man's family emergency because it's inconvenient. And they're watching you try to intimidate me for suggesting that maybe, just maybe, you could choose kindness instead. A senator at table 4 slowly set down her wineglass. The governor was openly staring. A tech CEO had pulled out his phone, not to check it, but to record. Eleanor realized it in the same moment. Her expression shifted, calculating rapidly. She'd built her reputation on being gracious, charitable, philanthropic. America's next billionaire bride with a heart of gold. That image was cracking with every second this standoff continued. David, Lila said, not breaking eye contact with Eleanor, go be with your wife. I'll handle your section. Lila, you can't. David's voice broke. Go. It's fine, I've got this. Eleanor's hands clenched at her sides. Her smile was gone now, replaced with naked fury. If you think, Ms. Whitmore. The voice came from the dining hall entrance, deep, uncertain, shocked. Grant Blackwood stood in the doorway, phone dangling forgotten in his hand. He'd heard everything. Every word Lila said. Every threat Eleanor made. Every second of a confrontation that revealed exactly who his fiancé was when she thought he wasn't watching. The blood had drained from Eleanor's face. Grant, she said, her voice returning to that warm, gentle tone instantly. Darling, this is just a staff situation, nothing to... I heard you. Grant's voice was quiet, hollow. I heard all of it. The dining hall remained frozen. 50 of Aspen's most powerful people watching a billionaire realize he'd been engaged to a monster. Grant looked at Lila, then David, then back to Eleanor. We need to talk, he said. Now. Privately. Eleanor's mask was perfect now. Concern, confusion, love. Of course, darling. Let me just... Now, Eleanor. She flinched at his tone, then collected herself, smiled at the guests, and followed Grant out of the room with her head high. The moment they disappeared, the dining hall erupted in whispers. Lila stood in the middle of the room, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Her hands shook. Her knees felt weak. She'd just confronted one of the most powerful women in Colorado. She'd just destroyed any chance of stable employment at this estate. She'd just risked everything for a man she barely knew and a principle that might cost her the ability to keep her promise to Marcus. But when she looked at David, at the grateful tears streaming down his face, at the way he mouthed thank you before rushing toward the exit to be with his wife, she knew she'd make the same choice again. Patricia approached slowly, her expression unreadable. That, she said quietly, was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever witnessed. Probably both, Lila admitted, her voice shaking now. Patricia studied her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, she smiled. Either way, someone finally said it. Someone finally told her no, Grant's private office overlooked Aspen Mountain. He'd chosen this room specifically for its views, the kind of perspective that reminded him there were bigger things than business deals and board meetings. Tonight, the mountains looked indifferent to human drama. Eleanor stood by the window, arms crossed, her red dress still stunning even in the aftermath of humiliation. She'd regained her composure in the walk from the dining hall to the office. The mask was back, hurt, confused, unfairly attacked. Grant, that maid completely overstepped. Stop. His voice was flat. Just stop. She blinked, switching tactics. The staff need clear boundaries. David made a mistake, and I was addressing it. That girl, Lila, she had no authority to... She had basic human decency. Grant sat heavily in his desk chair, something that was apparently missing from that room until she walked in. That's not fair, isn't it? He looked at her directly. How many people have you fired, Eleanor? I don't keep count. When there are performance issues, 17. Grant pulled up a file on his laptop. In 18 months, 17 staff members dismissed under your watch, most for reasons Patricia couldn't verify, most without severance, most without references. Eleanor's expression flickered. You've been tracking. I asked Patricia to compile a report tonight, while you were explaining to our guests that the situation was a misunderstanding. He scrolled through the document, each line a knife. Maria, 11 years of excellent service, fired for a water spot. James, fired for trimming hedges wrong. Another server fired for saying bless you when you sneezed. Should I continue? Those were legitimate. A wine drop, Eleanor. A single wine drop, while a man was executing an impossible task you demanded in the middle of a formal dinner. It's about standards. It's about power. Grant stood, walking to the window to put distance between them. It's about making people afraid, making them small, making them understand that you control whether they eat, whether they keep their homes, whether they can provide for their families. You're being dramatic. He spun to face her. I heard you threaten to blacklist Lila across the entire state. I heard you dismiss David's family emergency as a personal problem. I heard every word you said to that young woman who was brave enough, or desperate enough, to challenge you. Silence stretched between them. When Eleanor spoke again, her voice was different, colder. You don't understand what it takes to run a household at this level. Then explain it to me. Explain how terrorizing staff is necessary. People need clear consequences. Without discipline, everything falls apart. There's a difference between discipline and cruelty. Is there? Eleanor's mask was slipping now, revealing something harder underneath. You've spent your whole life in boardrooms, Grant. You fire people all the time. How is this different? I fire people for cause, with severance, with dignity. I don't humiliate them. I don't threaten to destroy their careers over nothing. I don't enjoy watching them suffer. Enjoy? Her laugh was bitter. You think I enjoy this? I think you do. The realization settled over Grant like ice. I think you liked watching David's hands shake. I think you liked seeing the fear in Lila's eyes when you threatened her. I think that's who you've been this entire time, and I was too blind to see it. Eleanor's expression went blank. Then she smiled. Not the warm smile Grant had fallen for, but something sharp and knowing. You're right. You were blind. You wanted a brilliant, beautiful partner who could navigate your world. Someone who could host your parties and impress your friends. Someone with the right background, the right connections. You got exactly what you wanted. This isn't what I wanted. isn't it? You wanted someone who could manage your estate, your staff, your social obligations, so you didn't have to. You wanted someone to handle the messy parts of maintaining this lifestyle. I did that. The only difference is now you actually saw how it works. Grant stared at her, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time. Who are you? Eleanor smiled. I'm exactly who I've always been. You just chose not to look. Get out. Grant. Out of this office, out of this estate. We're done. Her expression finally broke, panic flashing across her features. You can't be serious. The wedding is in 6 weeks. Everyone knows. They'll know we called it off. They'll know why. He pulled his phone from his pocket. Patricia is already compiling testimonies. I've contacted employment lawyers. Every person you've fired or threatened will get compensation and references. And I'm contacting the agency in New York where you worked before me. Eleanor went very still. What? Rebecca told me about rumors. I dismissed them. Now I'm going to verify them. Grant's voice was steel. If you've done this before, and I think you have, I'm going to make sure it's documented. Not to destroy you, but to protect anyone who might work for you next. For the first time since he'd met her, Eleanor looked genuinely afraid. Grant, please. We can work through this. No, we can't. Because this isn't a disagreement or a misunderstanding. It's who you are. He opened the office door. Patricia will help you pack. I want you gone by morning. You're making a mistake. Yes, I made it 3 years ago. I'm correcting it now. Eleanor stood frozen for a moment, her mind clearly racing through options, strategies, ways to salvage this. Then she lifted her chin, collected her dignity, and walked past him without another word. Grant waited until her footsteps faded down the hallway. Then he sat at his desk, put his face in his hands, and tried to process the fact that he'd almost married someone capable of such casual cruelty. His phone buzzed. Marcus Rowan. Heard about tonight through the grapevine. You okay? Grant typed back. No, but I will be. Then he pulled up Patricia's report and started reading through every single complaint, every testimony, every story of fear and humiliation that had accumulated under his roof while he was too busy to notice. By dawn, he'd contacted every person Eleanor had fired. By the end of the week, he'd provided settlements and references to all 17. And by the end of the month, he'd discovered Eleanor's pattern stretched back 15 years, across 5 cities, 7 jobs, and dozens of victims who'd been too afraid or too powerless to speak up. Justice moved slowly, but it moved. Grant didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his office reading through complaint after complaint, pattern after pattern, a trail of destruction that stretched back to Eleanor's college years. The files Marcus Rowan sent were damning. A former supervisor from her first job in Chicago described a young employee who'd quit after Eleanor's mentorship left her with panic attacks. An HR director from New York outlined 3 separate incidents where Eleanor had made assistants cry during presentations. A sealed lawsuit from San Francisco, settled with NDAs, involving a paralegal who'd accused Eleanor of creating a hostile work environment so severe she'd needed therapy. Every complaint used similar language: controlling, cruel, punitive, escalating. Every complaint had been buried. Eleanor's family connections, her father's position as federal judge, her mother's old money influence, all of it had smoothed over each incident. Money changed hands. NDAs were signed. People disappeared into new careers or no careers at all. Rebecca arrived at the estate at 4 a.m., driving up from a case in Denver when Grant called. "Tell me you finally see it," she said, accepting coffee in his office. "I see it." Grant's voice was hollow. I see all of it. How did I miss this? Because she's brilliant at hiding it from people who matter to her goals. Rebecca had prosecuted enough abusers to recognize the patterns. Narcissists are incredible actors when they need to be. They show you exactly what you want to see. I brought her into my home. I gave her power over people who depended on me for their livelihood. Yes, you did. Rebecca didn't soften it. And now you fix it. How? Settlements don't undo the damage. References don't erase years of fear. No, but accountability helps. Transparency helps. And making sure she can't do this to anyone else, that helps most of all. Grant looked at his sister. What do you mean? You have documentation now. Multiple. Witnesses. A pattern spanning 15 years. File a civil suit for the treatment of your staff. Make it public. Make it impossible for her to hide behind NDAs and family money. That would destroy her reputation. She destroyed 17 careers at your estate alone, probably hundreds more across her lifetime. Rebecca set down her coffee. You feel guilty. I get it. But your guilt isn't more important than protecting her next victims. It was brutal. It was true. Grant spent the next week consulting with lawyers, speaking personally with every staff member Eleanor had targeted, and building a case that would prevent her from easily moving on to terrorize others. He also did something harder. He examined his own role. He'd seen the signs. His sister had warned him. His business partner had warned him. He'd dismissed it all because acknowledging the truth would have been inconvenient, uncomfortable, and would have required admitting he'd been wrong about someone he loved. That willful blindness had consequences. Real consequences for real people. David's wife recovered from surgery, but David still had nightmares about that dining hall. Sophia had developed an anxiety disorder from months of fear. Another former employee confessed she'd had suicidal thoughts after Eleanor destroyed her career over a perceived slight. Grant sat with each of them. He listened. He apologized. He offered therapy resources, compensation, whatever they needed. Some accepted. Some told him his apology meant nothing. They were right. Some forgave him, which somehow felt worse. Lila was the hardest conversation. She still worked at the estate, though Grant had offered to release her from the contract with full payment. She'd refused. I need the work, she said simply. Marcus's tuition doesn't wait for moral victories. They met in the estate's garden on a cool morning. Lila wore her regular clothes, jeans and a simple sweater, looking younger than she had in her maid's uniform. You saved David's job, Grant said. Probably saved his sanity. You made me see what I should have seen years ago. I didn't do it for you, Lila replied. Not cruel, just honest. I did it because watching someone get destroyed for nothing makes me sick. I've seen it too many times. Usually I can't afford to speak up. This time I could. Because you were willing to lose everything. Because I've already lost everything that matters. Parents dead, raising my brother alone, 3 jobs, never quite enough money. She shrugged. What's one more firing? At least I'd know I tried. Grant studied her, this young woman who'd shown more courage than anyone in that room full of senators and CEOs. What can I do to make this right? You can't make it right. You can only do better going forward. Lila met his eyes. Hire good people. Pay them well. Treat them with dignity. And if someone tells you there's abuse happening in your house, believe them the first time. I will. Good. She stood to leave. Lila. Grant's voice stopped her. Why did you really do it? The truth. She was quiet for a moment. Then, Because my mom worked as a housekeeper for rich families. She came home exhausted, sometimes crying, but she never talked about why. I was 12. I didn't understand. Then one day I went to pick her up at work, and I saw how they treated her, like she was invisible, like she didn't matter. Her voice stayed steady, but her eyes were bright. She died when I was 19, but I remember her face when that family spoke to her like she was nothing, and I promised myself that if I ever saw someone treating another person that way, and I could do something about it, I would. She'd be proud of you, Grant said quietly. I hope so. Lila walked away, leaving Grant alone in the garden with his regrets and his responsibilities. Eleanor left Aspen quietly, but the lawsuit Grant filed wasn't quiet. It became national news. Billionaire calls off wedding, exposes fiance's pattern of abuse. The story dominated headlines for weeks. Eleanor's father tried to bury it. Her lawyers fought back, but too many witnesses spoke up. Too many stories aligned. The tide had turned. Grant learned that love wasn't enough when it was built on willful blindness, that being good at business didn't excuse being bad at seeing harm, that wealth created responsibility, especially to people with less power. He learned those lessons too late for some people, but he learned them. The civil lawsuit made Eleanor Whitmore radioactive. Not because Grant's legal team pursued it aggressively, though they did. Not because the evidence was overwhelming, though it was. But because 17 staff members stood up in depositions and told their stories without flinching. Maria described being fired after 11 years for a water spot, then being blacklisted at every agency in Colorado when she tried to find new work. Sophia detailed the panic attacks that started 3 months into Eleanor's reign and still required therapy. A former chef named Michael talked about being accused of theft with no evidence, fired on the spot, and losing his apartment when Eleanor's references destroyed his reputation. The press covered every revelation. America's philanthropist darling exposed a serial abuser. Pattern of cruelty spanning 15 years. Billionaire apologizes for enabling fiance's reign of terror. Eleanor's PR team tried spinning it. Overzealous staff, misunderstandings, a smear campaign. But too many stories aligned, too many witnesses corroborated, and Grant's refusal to protect her eliminated her main shield. The settlement came 4 months later. Significant financial compensation for every staff member Eleanor had fired or harassed. Public apologies. Agreements preventing Eleanor from working in any supervisory capacity without disclosure of her history. Her father's judgeship came under scrutiny for his role in suppressing previous complaints. Her mother's charity boards quietly requested her resignation. The Manhattan marketing firm issued a statement condemning Eleanor's behavior and donating to workplace advocacy organizations. Eleanor moved to Europe, reportedly to focus on personal growth. Translation: exile until the news cycle moved on. But Grant's work didn't end with the settlement. He restructured the estate's entire employment system. Fair wages, clear grievance procedures, independent oversight. Patricia was promoted to full estate manager with authority to overrule any family member's treatment of staff. Staff members received therapy resources, professional development funding, and protection against retaliation. David returned to work after his wife's recovery. He still got nervous during formal dinners, but Patricia made sure he was never put in vulnerable positions. Grant personally apologized 3 times. David accepted the 3rd time, though his trust remained fragile. The real changes happened quietly. Sophia felt safe enough to laugh again. New hires weren't warned to stay invisible. They were welcomed as professionals. The estate's atmosphere transformed from fearful silence to genuine function. Grant also donated $2 million to organizations supporting service workers, domestic abuse survivors, and whistleblower protection programs. It didn't erase what happened under his roof, but it acknowledged that the problem extended beyond one household. He spoke at conferences about employer accountability, using his own failures as cautionary tales. Some people praised his honesty. Others, rightfully, noted that billionaires who enabled abuse shouldn't be celebrated for eventually doing the right thing. Grant accepted the criticism. It was deserved. Rebecca watched her brother work through his guilt and his responsibility. "You can't undo it," she told him one evening. "But you're trying to do better. That counts." "Does it?" Grant asked. "People still got hurt because I didn't look, because I chose not to see." "Yes, and now people are safer because you finally did." Rebecca squeezed his shoulder. "Both things are true. You live with both." The wedding venue in Aspen cancelled automatically when the engagement ended, but Grant donated the already paid deposits to a women's shelter. The ring went back to the jeweler with instructions to melt it down. He couldn't imagine giving Eleanor's ring to anyone else, ever. 6 months after that catastrophic dinner, Blackwood Estate hosted another charity event. This time, the cause was workplace dignity and fair labor practices. The guest list included labor organizers, non-profit directors, and advocacy groups, and every staff member who'd worked under Eleanor was invited as a guest, not as servers. Maria came in a beautiful dress, accompanied by her daughter who'd made it through her first semester of college. Michael came with his new head chef position at an Aspen restaurant that had hired him after reading about the lawsuit. Sophia came with her therapist's blessing and left early when she felt overwhelmed, which everyone respected. David came with his wife, who was healthy and grateful, and kept thanking Grant until he gently told her she didn't owe him gratitude. He owed her an apology for not protecting her husband. Lila Monroe attended briefly before her night shift started. Grant found her on the terrace, looking at the mountain views. "Still working nights?" he asked. "For now. Marcus got accepted to MIT with a full scholarship. Found out yesterday." "That's incredible. Congratulations." "Yeah." She smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. Turns out his essay about his sister standing up to power in fancy ballrooms made quite an impression on the admissions committee. Grant laughed, surprised. "He wrote about that night?" "He wrote about the principle, about doing what's right, even when it costs you everything. About how courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and acting anyway." Lila looked at Grant directly. "He learned that from our mom. I'm just trying to live up to her example." "You're succeeding." "Some days." She checked her watch. "My shift starts in 10 minutes. "Lila." Grant stopped her. "You know you don't have to work nights anymore. The settlement, the compensation." "I know, but I like the work, and I like keeping my promise to finish what I started." She smiled slightly. "Besides, someone needs to make sure the new staff culture actually sticks." She was right. Change required vigilance. After Lila left, Grant stood on the terrace watching the sun set over Aspen Mountain. The estate was different now. Not perfect. Perfection was impossible. But better. Kinder. More honest. He thought about Eleanor sometimes, wondered if she'd learned anything, or if she'd simply found new victims in Europe. He couldn't control that. He could only control his own actions, his own household, his own responsibility. Inside, the charity event continued. Laughter and conversation, purpose and hope. Outside, Grant Blackwood stood alone with his regrets and his commitments. Both would be with him for a long time. He'd earned both. 3 years later, Lila Monroe graduated from community college with an associate degree in social work. She'd taken night classes while working part-time at Blackwood Estate and another job at a non-profit supporting service workers. It took longer than traditional students, but she'd never been traditional. She'd been surviving, then striving, then finally building something sustainable. Marcus was in his junior year at MIT, thriving. He called every Sunday to tell her about his robotics projects and his research opportunities and the internship offers that kept arriving. He'd stopped asking if she was okay financially. She'd finally convinced him she was stable. The settlement from Grant's lawsuit had helped. Not a fortune, but enough to breathe. Enough to reduce from 3 jobs to 2, then eventually to 1 full-time position at an organization advocating for domestic workers' rights. Enough to take classes. Enough to imagine a future beyond constant survival. Patricia had retired the previous year, and she'd insisted on having lunch with Lila before she left Colorado for her daughter's home in Arizona. That night in the dining hall, Patricia said over sandwiches at a downtown cafe, "I thought you'd just destroyed your life for nothing." "I thought so too," Lila admitted. "But you did it anyway. Why?" Lila had thought about this question a lot over the years. She'd given interviews about it, local news, then a magazine article about workplace courage, then a podcast about speaking truth to power. Everyone wanted to know what made her step forward when no one else did. The real answer was simpler than people wanted to hear. "Because I couldn't not do it," Lila said. "Because watching someone get destroyed for nothing makes me physically sick. Because my mom raised me to believe that dignity isn't something you earn. It's something you're born with, and no one has the right to take it away. Your mother raised you well. She tried. I just wish she'd lived to see what came from it." Patricia squeezed her hand. "She sees it. I'm sure of that." The dining hall incident had become shorthand in certain circles. Articles about workplace courage referenced the Blackwood moment. Advocacy organizations used Lila's story in training materials. A professor at Columbia Business School assigned a case study about power dynamics and bystander intervention based on that night. Lila found it strange, being a symbol. She'd just been trying to survive. She'd just been sick of watching cruelty win. But she'd learned that sometimes survival looks like resistance. Sometimes keeping your integrity costs you everything, except the ability to look at yourself in the mirror. David still worked at Blackwood Estate. They'd become friends, in the cautious way people do when they've survived something terrible together. His wife sent Lila Christmas cards. His kids drew pictures of the lady who helped Dad. Sophia had moved to Portland and opened a catering business. She sent updates occasionally, always mentioning she'd finally stopped having nightmares about walking down that hallway. Maria's daughter graduated from college and was working in education policy in Denver, inspired by her mother's story of resilience. Grant Blackwood had become an unexpected ally. After the settlement, he'd funded a non-profit focused on protecting service workers from abuse. Lila sat on the advisory board. They met quarterly to review cases, advocate for legislation, and support workers who needed help fighting back against employers who thought wealth meant immunity. Their relationship was professional, cordial, and honest. Grant never tried to position himself as a hero. He owned his failure to see, his complicity in Eleanor's reign, his slow response to obvious abuse. That honesty earned him more respect than any charity donation could have. Eleanor was still in Europe, reportedly working as a consultant for luxury brands. Lila tried not to think about her. Some people learned, some people didn't. You couldn't control that. You could only decide what you'd tolerate in your own life. On the night of Lila's graduation, Marcus flew in from Boston to watch his sister walk across the stage. Afterward, they went to dinner at a modest restaurant in Denver. Nothing fancy, just good food and better company. "You know what Mom would say right now?" Marcus asked. raising a glass of water in toast. Lila smiled. She'd say we survived, and that's the first victory. Everything else is bonus. To survival, Marcus said. To survival, Lila echoed, and to doing the right thing, even when it's terrifying. They clinked glasses, two kids who'd lost everything and built it back, not through connections or wealth or power, but through work and courage and the refusal to let cruelty go unchallenged. Quiet heroes don't ask for applause. They just show up, do what's right, and keep moving forward. Sometimes that's enough to change everything. The end.